Hi, my name's Alan Smith from bloggersguides.net, and this is one of a series of webcasts looking at BizTalk Server 2009. I'm particularly focusing on working with a service aggregator pattern that I've built in another couple of webcasts. So the first one was just the basic service aggregator webcast. I then looked at the orchestration performance, where I made some improvements to the design, and this one is going to look at adding some reliability to this design. We're going to be looking at working with the retry configuration in the send ports and looking at reliable messaging. So an overview of the design, I basically built a service aggregator where the client makes a call to the orchestration, and this is going to make calls out to 3 services, and I'm doing this operation in parallel, and I'm going to take in the responses from these 3 services, aggregate them together in a summary message, and send that back to the client. So the scenario is booking a place at a conference. We've got the booking the conference, booking the flight, and booking the hotel as all being involved with that business process. Now the scenario that I'm going to look at is what happens if some of the services are unavailable. So in this example, the flight service is down for a few seconds, or maybe a few minutes as they're just doing a restart here. And that is going to be down when we actually send the message in. So we've got the request coming in, and we're making the calls to the 3 services. And in this case, the conference and the hotel service are returning with valid results, but we're making another call to the flight service, and that's still not available. Eventually the flight service comes back online, and we're making a call, and we get the response back, and we're sending the summary message back to the client. It's fairly easy to get this kind of thing working with BizTalk Server. We've got the retry intervals and retry counts in the send ports, and I'm going to be leveraging that to actually add the reliability to my process. So just a quick refresher on the design. This is the orchestration I was using. I'm receiving a message from the file transport. I'm running through and I'm making calls out to these 3 services in parallel to book the conference place, book the flight, and book the hotel. And then I'm using this parallel actions here to actually bring in the results and aggregate them and send this back to the client. I've got my 3 services hosted in a Windows Forms application here. And this is cool for demo purposes, as I can start and stop these services individually. And we can also see the actual counts, the number of flights booked, the number of conferences booked, and the number of hotels booked. So what I'm going to do is start testing these. I'm going to start all 3 of these services so everything is running. And this is the regular scenario. So what I'm going to do is take this message, just do a copy paste of that message to send it through. And you can see that all 3 of these services get called, and we get our actual confirmation message coming out here with the actual confirmation IDs there. So I've actually made some changes to the actual send ports that I'm going to be using to call these services. These are the ports for the conference, the flight, and the hotel service. And I've made the same changes in all 3 ports, so I'll show you what I've done. Firstly, I've gone into the timeouts of the bindings and set these all to 10 seconds. The default value is 1 minute. The reason that I've done that is because I want to find out immediately if the service isn't available, or as quickly as possible. So setting these to 10 seconds is meaning that we will basically start triggering errors earlier, and it's going to be quicker for testing. You should think about what values you should set. Maybe the default of 1 minute isn't great in all real-world scenarios. In the advanced transport options, the retry count is set to 3 by default. The retry interval is set to 5 minutes by default. And I've set that to 1 minute just so it's going to be quicker to actually test, and we're going to see the results quickly when we're running through the webcast. And so that change has been made to all 3 of these ports. So they've all got these 1 minute timeouts for the actual retry interval, and they've all got the bindings changed there. So what I was wanting to test was what happens if these services go down. You can see if I actually send the message through with everything working. Very quickly, all 3 of these services will be called, so we should be getting 2 of everything booked there. And what I'm going to do is just stop the hotel service. So that service is no longer responding to client requests. And I'm going to send in a message and just see what happens here. I'll actually send in 3 messages, so you can see we've got 3 flights, 3 conferences booked. But because the hotel service is down, we're not getting any bookings placed for the hotel, which is meaning we're going to get inconsistency in the results. People will turn up to the conference and they won't have anywhere to stay. So I'm going to look in the event viewer and just F5 to refresh this, and we're getting a bunch of warnings coming from BizTalk Server 2009. And looking in here, you can see that it is related to this iHotel service. The adapter failed to transmit a message to this port. We couldn't connect to the actual server on that URL. You can see that we've got something that's very important here. I'll just copy paste this into Notepad. And what it's saying here is the message will be retransmitted after the retry interval specified in this port. So this is a warning message telling us that we couldn't communicate with a service, we're going to do a retry. If I keep pressing F5, you will see another retry coming in about a minute's time when that warning comes through again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable start this service again, and what we're wanting to see is that the booking for the number of hotels goes up to 3. You can see I've got another set of warnings coming through, so these came through at 5:15, 20, and these ones were coming through at 5:16. So at about 5:17 we should be making the calls out to those services. I'm going to pause the recording until we get towards that time, so you don't have to sit and wait for this to happen. Okay, so we're on 15 seconds. It should be coming up any time now to start calling these services, and we should hopefully see that it's going to book 3 hotels for us. So the message has got through, and we've got some consistency in our results there. And it should work as well in the same way if we have 2 of these services down, or even if all 3 of these services are down. So if you've been watching the previous series that I've done in my webcasts, you'll realise that I'm a great believer in stress testing. So instead of just testing this with individual messages, let's send a big bunch of messages through and see what happens. I'm going to restart my application here and fire up these 3 services. So all the actual counts are on 0 at the moment. And in my stress folder I've got 128 of these inbound test messages. They're all copies of each other, so they should all generate the same results. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy these messages in. And then what we will see is the services will start getting called. Now, as they start getting called, I'm going to stop and start the flight service, stop and start the hotel service, and stop and start the conference service. So we're basically blocking these services from processing. And we should see that that will generate a bunch of warnings in the Windows event log. So I'm firing these guys in. Let's stop the flight service anyway. Let's stop the hotel service now, and after a while we can stop the conference service, and then we can start the flight service again, and you can see a few more flights are getting booked. Flight service is going to go down again, that one's not too reliable, so we'll start the flight service and start the hotel service, and I can start the conference service, and then we can stop this flight service. Wait for a while until the other guys have completed, and then we can start the flight service again. So I'm generating a lot of unreliability in my services. So let's fire up the flight service. So if I go into the Windows event log, we should see a bunch of warnings coming through here in the application section, and you can see that all these warnings talking about not being able to communicate with the service and saying that we will retry this message after the retry interval. I'm going to leave this running. What we're expecting to see is 128 calls appearing in each of these services, and also we should have 129 objects in this folder because I've got my original test message and the 128 responses that are coming out. So we're already on at over 100 hotels and over 100 conferences. The flights still have to come up yet because that was the most unreliable service. And so we got 128 hotels booked, 128 conferences booked, and we're still waiting for about 40 flight messages to come in. So there, everything has been booked satisfactory now, and in the docs folder you can see we've got our 129 objects there. So when you're doing this in a real world scenario, you probably want to think a bit better about how you're actually going to be working with these retries. Now the Transport Advanced option, this is not part of the adapter configuration. So if we go in the configuration, we've got our bindings timeouts, and this is specific to the Windows Communication Foundation adapters. I can configure when they detect a timeout, so they will do the retries quicker there if we've got these various timeouts set appropriately. Working with WCF services, you really want to make sure that you've got these set up correctly to give you the best performance and the best reliability. Transport advanced options is not adapter dependent, so any adapter that you're using, you've got this retry count and retry interval that you can specify here. So what you shouldn't really do is to push the retry count up to something like that, 999, and set the retry interval there. Normally if something's gone down, we don't want to keep hammering this service up to 1,000 times before it gives us the response. So I try and keep these values fairly low, and then maybe put in a meaningful value for the retry intervals there. You've also got a backup transport, so you could also specify that if this service call doesn't work, we can go to another service. And you could even call the same service here, but with a different retry interval. So try it once every 5 minutes, and if that fails, try it 3 times once every half an hour, just to actually make sure that you've got the utmost reliability of communicating with that service. Now this can be used in a lot of nice ways. If you're sending out a file, for example, if I cancel out of here, go into my file send port. If I was sending this out over an FTP, for example, to an FTP server, I could set up my backup transport to use the file adapter and stick it down in a file location. So if it didn't upload it on the FTP server, you could save it down to a file location and then manually update it later. Also note that you're getting these errors coming up, or the warnings coming up in the Windows event log. So if you're using Microsoft Operations Manager or System Center Operations Manager, you can basically hook something on that. You know, if you get a few of these errors, you're going to get these anyway with a natural sort of operations of unreliable networks. You're always going to get these warnings being generated. But if you start to get a big stream of them like I've done now, it probably means something is wrong. So in System Center Operations Manager, or you could basically go in and you could basically configure, you know, if you get more than 10 of these occurring within a few minutes, then this is going to raise a threshold, and you really want to alert somebody and actually so they can actually detect what's going on. If you do run out of intervals, this will be a suspended message and it will generate an error in here. So this is a sign that something has gone wrong and you haven't actually been able to deliver that message. So when I'm in maybe a development environment, I maybe don't want these retries to be kicking in. So what I can do is go in here and just set the retry count to 0 for these various services. And I'll do that with basically the 3 services here. So that was the conference, this one's the flight. Knock that onto 0, and do the same with the hotel. So this will give us sort of an immediate feedback if we're getting an error. So I'm going to delete these messages that I've got there, and I've got my services running. So copy paste should actually generate an additional service. Now if I stop this and do another copy paste, I get the 130 there, and after the timer has expired, I should be getting errors occurring here. So you can see that we've got a couple of errors, and it's saying that I couldn't connect to this, and also that the actual orchestration has become suspended. And we can go in here and query our suspended service instances. I'm going to take all in-process service instances, and you can see that we've got our suspended orchestration there. So if I was going to be building error handling and working with transactions and stuff, or if I wanted to provide a quick response if my service was exposed as a web service, I wouldn't want to wait for all these retries to kick in. I would want to immediately get back that error, so I can see what my exception handling is doing in that scenario. So to wrap this one up, use the retry count and retry interval to reliably call services. You should definitely look at making changes to these. The defaults are 3 retries at 5-minute intervals. So if you're testing something, you probably want to set it to 0 retries there. So it's not going to actually retry, and you're going to get errors occurring immediately that you can actually respond to when you're working in a development environment and maybe a test environment as well. Production environment, choose what you set. Don't just leave them with the defaults, and don't overuse these settings. Don't like set it to sort of hundreds of retries there, because you do want to be notified in error with an error if a system is down for a long time. Make use of the backup transport locations as well. That can be very useful in a lot of scenarios. So if your message doesn't get out to one location, you can send it out to another location. And with all these errors that you're generating, you can use MOM or SCOM to actually pick up the errors and provide alerts on there. If you're working with Windows Communication Foundation bindings, and you should not be using the SOAP adapter today, you should be working with the WCF adapters. Make sure that you're setting the binding timeouts appropriately. The defaults are 1 minute on all of the actual timeouts, so make sure that you've got appropriate settings there for your environment, and test those in the test environment, and always stress test in the test environment to make sure that those timeouts aren't causing issues.